The timestamp changed while I was holding the paper. I watched the numbers physically rearrange themselves. The 5 became a 1. The 51 became a 43. The way digital ink shifts on an e-reader, except this was regular printer paper, warm in my hands, and the printer behind me was still humming from having spit it out 12 seconds earlier. The page had said the night audit was completed at 5:51 a.m. Now it said 1:43 a.m. by me. With my employee ID at the bottom, the current actual time by every clock in the room was 1:43 a.m. And the printer was finishing a second sheet, and that one said 1:43 too, and they matched. I sat at the front desk of the Lakeshore Inn off Delaware Avenue in Buffalo, holding 2 pages that had been written by 2 different versions of the same minute, and for about 30 seconds I did not move. The lobby was empty. The wall clock ticked. Outside, through the front windows, the parking lot was empty, except for my Civic and the snow that had started about an hour earlier. I want to back up. I'd been working at the Lakeshore for about 8 months at that point. It wasn't a glamorous job. The hotel was one of those places built sometime in the late 70s as part of a chain that had gone under, then bought and renamed twice, and now operated as an independent under a name that nobody had bothered to update on the signage out front. 3 stories, an indoor pool that had been drained 2 years ago, a continental breakfast that consisted of bagels and a yogurt machine that mostly didn't work. After 1 in the morning, the lobby was so quiet I could hear the ice machine on the second floor clicking on and off. I'd taken the job because I needed something with health insurance. The day shift at the auto parts warehouse had finally caught up with my back. My wife had passed away 2 years before that, lung cancer, and our daughter Ellie was at SUNY Geneseo finishing her degree, and I'd reached the point in life where solitude wasn't lonely so much as it was just the texture of every room I walked into. The night shift suited me. Nobody talked to me. The world stayed asleep and I stayed awake, and at 7 in the morning, I'd hand the desk over to Marisol and drive home and sleep until 2 in the afternoon. And that was my life. That's the context I want you to hold. I wasn't a dramatic person. I balanced my checkbook on paper. I changed the oil on my Civic myself. The man holding those 2 pages was the kind of man who would normally have an explanation ready for every strange thing he saw, and the explanation would always be that he was tired, or that the printer had a bug, or that the world was simply more boring than his eyes were trying to make it. So I told myself the printer had glitched. Buffer error. The system clock had hiccuped, and the paper had picked up 2 different timestamps from the spool. I went into the back office to pull up the audit history on the manager's computer. I was halfway through scrolling when I noticed something else. There was an extra entry. The audits ran 1 per night. Always 1. October 14th, October 15th, October 16th. Except in the entry for October 17th, there were 2, both finalized by employee ID 4471, both stamped at 5:51 a.m. Identical, except that one of them had a small red asterisk next to it that I'd never seen before, and when I hovered my cursor over it, the tooltip said, "Duplicate event recorded." I'd worked the night of October 17th. I remembered it. I'd checked in 3 guests, finalized the audit, gone home. There had not been a duplicate of anything. When I came back out to the front desk, both report pages were gone. I had set them down on the counter, side by side, less than 2 minutes earlier. The lobby had been empty the whole time. The front door's chime hadn't sounded. There was no one in the building who could have taken them, but the counter was bare. Where the pages had been, there was a single ballpoint pen, lying parallel to the edge of the desk that I had not put there. I picked the pen up. It was mine. It was the one I kept in my breast pocket. I patted my pocket. The pen wasn't there. I'd had it 10 minutes ago. I'd used it to sign the previous shift's handover sheet. I put the pen back in my pocket. I sat down. For a long time, I didn't move. I want to tell you that I left the job that night. I want to tell you I was the kind of man who reads a sign and gets out. But I wasn't. I was a 53-year-old widower with a daughter in college and a mortgage, and I'd just had what was probably a tired moment in a quiet building. The pen had probably been on the desk the whole time. The reports had probably blown into the trash when the HVAC kicked on. I told myself those things. I finished the shift. I went home. I slept. It was about a week later that I found the binder. I'd been looking for a stapler. The desk stapler had been jammed for 2 days, and I went into the supply closet behind the office to see if there was a spare. The closet was one of those rooms that had accumulated decades of stuff from previous owners and previous staff. This time I went deeper. I shifted some boxes of old stationery with the previous chain's letterhead. I moved a stack of phone books that hadn't been current since 2007, and on a low shelf, behind a plastic bin of dead Christmas lights, I found a black 3-ring binder. It was unmarked. I almost left it. But there was something about the way it had been placed, deliberately tucked behind everything else. I took it back to the front desk. The lobby was empty. I opened it. The first page was a typewritten list. I read it many times after that night, and I have it memorized. It said, "For the night shift only, please follow these instructions. They are not optional." Then it listed. 1. Do not check the clock between 2:17 and 2:19 a.m. If you do not look at the second hand. 2. The ice machine on the second floor will turn on by itself at approximately 3:30 a.m. Let it finish its cycle. Do not investigate. 3. If a guest calls down to the front desk between 4 o'clock and 4:30 a.m. and asks what time it is, tell them the time is 4 a.m. regardless of the actual time. 4. Do not enter the pool area after 1 a.m. The door should be locked. If it is unlocked, lock it without looking inside. 5. If you hear footsteps in the hallway behind the front desk, do not turn around until they have stopped completely. 6. There was no Rule 6. The line had been crossed out. Heavy black ink drawn over whatever had been written there, so thoroughly that the paper was warped from the pressure of the pen. I held the page up to the desk lamp and tilted it. I could not read what had been there. I could only tell that it had been long. 3 lines, maybe 4. Whoever had crossed it out had wanted very badly for it to be unreadable. The list resumed. 7. Do not eat anything that is not in a sealed container. The complimentary fruit on the counter is not for staff. 8. If the lights in the lobby flicker more than 3 times, leave the building immediately and return only after sunrise. 9. Above all, do not break the rules. The rules are what keep the time correct. There were 8 rules and a redacted one. 9 entries, 8 rules. I closed the binder and reopened it to make sure I'd seen what I'd seen. Same page, same redaction. Rule 6 gone. Then I flipped through the rest of the binder. Just blank-lined paper, page after page, with date headings on a few of them. The dates went back about 3 years. On most of the dated pages, someone had written short entries in different handwritings. Quiet night, no incidents. Followed all rules, nothing happened. Almost broke number 3, caught myself in time. The last dated entry was from a Monday in March, about 7 months before. It just said, "I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. Whoever finds this, I'm sorry." Underneath that final entry, in much smaller writing, almost squeezed into the bottom margin, someone had added a single line in a different hand. The ink looked fresher. It said, "He didn't get to finish his shift." I closed the binder slowly. I told myself I was being foolish. I put it on the shelf under the front desk, and I went back to my night. But here's what happened next. At 2:16 a.m., I caught myself looking at the wall clock. I caught myself, and I looked away, and I felt foolish for looking away, so I said out loud, to nobody, "This is ridiculous." And then, with something between defiance and curiosity, I deliberately turned my head and looked at the clock at exactly 2:18 a.m. The second hand was still. I don't mean it was moving slowly. I don't mean the battery had died. I watched it for what felt like 5 seconds and it didn't move. Not a tick. Not a tremor. And then, while I watched, the minute hand jumped from the 18 to the 19, but it didn't tick the way it normally would. It jumped silently. The second hand started moving again, but it started moving from the 12, not from wherever it had stopped. And then I noticed something I almost missed. I was wearing a watch on my left wrist. I had not been wearing a watch when I sat down. I had not owned that watch in 3 years. It was thin and gold, with a small chain link band, and it had belonged to my wife. I sat there with my wrist out in front of me, looking at her watch, the watch I had buried at her funeral, and I felt the floor of my mind tilt. I took it off. I put it in the desk drawer. I closed the drawer. When I opened the drawer 5 minutes later to put a pen back, the watch was gone. At 3:30 a.m., the ice machine on the second floor turned on. I could hear it through the ductwork. It ran for about 40 minutes, longer than usual. I stayed at the front desk. At 4:11 a.m., the phone rang. I picked it up. A man's voice, older, a little hoarse, asked, "Excuse me, what time is it down there?" The rule said to tell him 4 a.m. The actual time was 4:11. But here's what I want you to understand. In the half second between his question and my answer, I felt something I didn't have a name for. A pull. Like a small magnet tugging the words in my mouth toward the truth. I almost said 4:11. I almost told him the real time. I don't know why. It felt important. It felt like something was waiting to hear it, somewhere, and was hoping I would say it. I said, "It's 4 o'clock, sir." He said, "Thank you." But before the line clicked off, just before, I heard something behind his voice. The hum of an ice machine, through the phone, as if he were calling from a hallway that had an ice machine running in it, as if he were calling from upstairs. I sat there with the phone in my hand and didn't move for a long time. I finished my shift. I gave the desk to Marisol at 7. I drove home. I went to bed. And when I woke up that afternoon, my wife's watch was sitting on my nightstand, in the small dish where I keep my keys. I want to be honest. That should have been the end. That should have been when I called in sick and never went back. But I held the watch for a long time. And I thought about Elliot Geneseo, and I thought about the mortgage, and I thought about how I'd spent the last 2 years making peace with a life that didn't make me happy, but at least made sense. And I decided that the watch had probably been in a box in the closet, and I'd probably found it during one of those middle-of-the-night searches you do when you can't sleep, and I'd brought it to work without remembering. I made myself decide that. I went back to work, and nothing happened. The clock kept moving normally. The ice machine ran briefly at 3:30 and stopped. The phone didn't ring. I didn't open the binder. The timestamps on my reports were correct. The night after that the same, and the night after that. About 2 weeks went by, and it was sometime during the second week, on a Wednesday I think, that I started hearing them. Not footsteps, conversations. The sounds were faint, coming through the ductwork from the second floor, which was supposed to be empty. I'd checked the registry. There were no guests on that floor. The hotel was running at maybe 30% capacity, and Russ, the day manager, had asked me to consolidate everyone on the first and third floors to save on cleaning. But I could hear voices up there. 2 of them, maybe 3, talking softly at the cadence of people having a slow evening. I couldn't make out words. The sound was barely above the level of the HVAC. If the lobby hadn't been so quiet, if my own breathing hadn't been so steady, I would not have noticed it at all. I checked the cameras. The hallway feeds for the second floor were dark, the way they always were after midnight. No motion, no light from under any door. I told myself the building was settling. I told myself sound carried strangely through old ductwork. I went back to my desk. The conversations continued for about 20 minutes. Then they stopped. The next night, the same time, the same thing. 20 minutes of soft talking from a floor that was empty, and then silence. I started checking the elevator more often. I noticed that it had begun stopping on the second floor. Not every night, but more nights than not. I'd be sitting at the desk, and the indicator above the lobby doors would tick from L to 1 to 2, and the elevator would sit there for about 40 seconds, and then come back down. The interior, when the doors opened, was always empty. I told myself the elevator was old. I told myself old elevators sometimes stopped on floors for no reason. I went back to my desk, but I started to feel something I want to describe carefully. Not fear, exactly. The feeling you get in a house that's bigger than the one you live in. The sense of unused rooms. Then, on a Saturday night, I broke the first rule. I didn't mean to. That's important. I was reaching for a pen that had rolled to the back of the desk, and I leaned forward, and my eyes caught the wall clock, and it was 2:17 a.m. I looked away as fast as I could, but in the half-second I'd seen it, I'd registered the second hand. It was on the 12, pointing straight up. Here's the thing I want you to notice. When I sat back up, before anything else happened, before the lights went out, before the reset, I looked at the desk. And on the desk, where there should have been one pen, there were two pens. Identical. The same color, the same brand, the same small chew mark on the cap from where I bit it sometimes when I was thinking. They were sitting an inch apart, side by side, parallel to the edge of the desk. I had not yet broken anything. The clock had said 2:17. I had only just looked away. The reset had not happened. But there were two pens. I want you to remember that. The duplication came before the violation. Whatever the system was, whatever the rules were tracking, it had already started. The breakage and the consequence were not in the order I'd assumed. For about 10 seconds, nothing else happened. I held my breath. I waited. Then the lights in the lobby went out. Not flickered, not dimmed, just went out. Total darkness, except for the green glow of the exit sign over the front door and the faint blue from the computer screen behind the desk. The ambient hum of the building, the HVAC, the ice machine, the soft buzz of the fluorescent in the back hallway, all of it stopped. And then they came back on. But it wasn't 2:17 anymore. The clock said 2:14 a.m. The computer said 2:14 a.m. My phone said 2:14 a.m. And the pen, the original one, was in front of me, exactly where my hand could reach without leaning forward. The second pen was gone. 3 minutes had been put back. The duplication had been cleaned up. I was where I was supposed to be. And then I noticed the painting. The painting on the wall above the lobby's faux fireplace, a generic landscape of a lake at sunset, was hanging slightly crooked, about 2 degrees off level, leaning to the right. It had not been crooked before. I'd looked at that painting hundreds of times. It had always been level. I got up. I walked over. I straightened it. When I got back to the desk, it was crooked again. I tried 3 more times. Each time I straightened it, I'd turn around, walk a few steps, and look back, and it would be tilted. Not falling, not slipping. Just resetting itself to that 2-degree lean every time my back was turned. I left it crooked. I sat at my desk, and I felt for the first time the shape of what was happening. The reset hadn't undone the moment. The reset had built a new version of the last 3 minutes, a version in which I hadn't reached for the pen, in which my eyes hadn't drifted to the clock. But something had to balance. Something had to be slightly off, somewhere, to account for the work the system had done. And that something was the painting. The crooked picture was the receipt. I didn't sleep when I got home that morning. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, and I thought about the binder and the entry from the previous worker. I can't do this anymore. And the line beneath it. He didn't get to finish his shift. That night, I went back to work. I went straight to the supply closet. I got the binder. I read every rule again, slowly. I noticed that the redacted Rule 6 was no longer fully redacted. I want you to hear that carefully. The black ink that had covered it was still there, but it was thinner, as if the ink had been wearing away. I could see, faintly, the shapes of letters. I tilted the page under the desk lamp. I could read 3 words. Do not remember. That was all I could read. The rest was still buried under the ink. 3 words. Do not remember. The rest of the rule was either an instruction that completed the sentence, or it was a prohibition on remembering something specific. I couldn't tell, but the words were there, and I had not seen them the first time, because the first time the redaction had been complete. The redaction had thinned. Something had been wearing it away while I wasn't looking. I put the binder down. For the next month, I followed every rule. I didn't deviate by a hair. I memorized them. I rehearsed them on the drive to work. I started carrying a list in my back pocket. I treated them the way a religious man treats his prayers, with the difference that I did not have any faith they meant something good, only the certainty that they meant something real. And during that month, things happened that should not have happened, but I followed the rules, and they did not affect me. On a Tuesday at 3:36 a.m., I heard footsteps in the hallway behind the front desk. The hallway behind the front desk was the staff hallway, leading to the back office and the supply closet. There was nobody else in the building who should have been back there. The footsteps were unhurried. They walked from the back of the hallway toward the front, then past the office, then stopped about 10 feet behind me. I did not turn around. I sat at the desk with my hands flat on the counter, and I stared straight ahead. Then the footsteps started moving again. But this time, they started without sound, the way a memory of footsteps would start. And then they faded into actual sound after a few seconds, walking back the way they'd come, and I heard the back door of the staff hallway open and close. There was no back door at the back of the staff hallway. The hallway dead-ended at the supply closet. I did not turn around for a full 10 minutes. A few nights later, around 1:15 a.m., I noticed that the door to the pool area was open. The pool area was off the side of the lobby, behind a glass wall, and the pool itself, as I mentioned, had been drained for years. The lights inside were always off. The door was always locked. But that night, the door was standing open about 6 inches. I could see a thin slice of darkness through the gap. I followed Rule 4. I walked over. I did not look inside. I reached for the handle, my eyes fixed on the door frame, and I pulled the door closed and turned the deadbolt. But just before it closed, in the half second the door was still in motion, I heard something from inside. A small sound, like a wet shoe stepping on tile. Right there, right at the threshold. I closed the door. I locked it. I walked back to my desk. I drank a full cup of coffee with both hands shaking. About an hour later, I felt the urge to go back and check that I'd locked it. The urge was strong. The urge was insistent. And I caught myself with my hand on the desk, half standing up, before I remembered the second clause of Rule 4. If you have already locked it, do not lock it again. I sat back down. I sat down, and I felt, for the first time, the rules pushing back against me from the inside, as if my own instincts had been turned into traps, and the only way to survive was to not trust myself. These things happened, and the rules covered them, and I obeyed. Then, in late November, the rules started to expand. I came in for my shift on a Friday night, and there was a new page in the binder. I knew it was new because I'd handled it enough by that point to know its weight, its smell, the feel of its pages. The new page was at the front, behind the original list. It was typewritten, on the same kind of paper. It was not in my handwriting. It said, 10. If you see a guest enter the lobby and check in, but no keycard is produced, do not log them. Pretend they were already a guest. 11. If the elevator stops at the second floor without being called, do not investigate. Wait for it to resume. 12. The bathroom on the lobby level has only one stall. If you find that it has two, use neither. Lock the bathroom door from the outside. 13. If you feel cold air coming from a vent that is not running, leave the area until it stops. The rules were getting more specific. They were getting more situational. They felt less like a list of warnings and more like a manual being updated by someone watching me. That night, I followed them. The elevator did, in fact, stop at the second floor at 2:48 a.m., with no guest having called it. I sat at the desk and watched the indicator. After about 40 seconds, the doors closed and it descended back to the lobby and opened. The interior was empty. But the inside of the elevator smelled faintly of perfume. Lavender and bergamot. The kind my wife had worn for the last 15 years of her life. The kind I hadn't smelled since the morning of her funeral. I closed the elevator doors. I went back to my desk. I told myself I'd imagined it. The bathroom on the lobby level continued to have only one stall. I checked it 3 times that night. Each time, one stall. The 4th time I checked, at 5:14 a.m., there were 2 stalls. I stood in the bathroom doorway with my hand on the light switch, and I stared at the 2nd stall. It was identical to the first. Same beige metal partition, same coat hook, same gap at the bottom. The floor underneath was unmarked. The grout lines in the tile didn't match up with the rest of the room. I followed the rule. I did not use either stall. I closed the bathroom door from the outside. I went and got the maintenance master key from the back office, and I locked it. When I came back at 5:30 to use the staff bathroom in the back, I passed the lobby bathroom. The door was unlocked. The deadbolt I'd thrown was still in the locked position from the inside, but the door was unlocked from the outside. I don't know how to explain that. I'm not sure either is correct. I just know what I saw. I locked it again. I did not look inside. The next night, the rule had been updated. It now read, "The bathroom on the lobby level has only one stall. If you find that it has 2, use neither. Lock the bathroom door from the outside. Do not lock it more than once. If the door is unlocked when you return, leave it unlocked. The bathroom is no longer your concern." I read that line 3 times. The bathroom is no longer your concern. I'd never read a sentence like it. It had the tone of someone closing a folder and putting it away. I started to think very carefully about who the rules were for. If the rules were for me, why did so many of them describe what I'd already done? If the rules were a guide to keeping the time correct, why were they being updated in response to my actions, instead of being given to me in advance? The only answer I could come up with was that the rules were not telling me what to do for the first time. They were telling me what I had already done correctly. They were a record. Documentation of patterns that worked, being given to me to maintain. I started to wonder if I was the most recent in a long line. It was around then, on a Thursday in early December, that the conversations from the 2nd floor got louder. I heard a glass set down on a hard surface, 3 sharp clicks like ice cubes touching, and then a long pause, and then the unmistakable sound of someone pouring liquid from a bottle. Then quiet. Then a man's voice, faint but suddenly present, and the man was laughing. A short, surprised laugh. The kind of laugh you make when someone tells a joke at the end of a long meal. I sat at the desk, and I stared at the ceiling. I told myself the building was settling. I told myself sound carried strangely through old ductwork. The phone rang. 4:11 a.m. A woman's voice this time. "Excuse me, what time is it down there?" I felt that pull again, the small magnet tugging the words, the almost truth. I said, "It's 4 o'clock, ma'am." There was a pause, then she said, "Are you sure?" I didn't know what to say. The rule said to tell them it was 4 a.m. The rule didn't cover follow-up questions. I said, "Yes, ma'am, it's 4 o'clock." She said, "Thank you," and hung up. But she'd hung up slowly, the way you hang up when you don't believe what you've just been told. And in the second before the line clicked off, I heard her exhale. A small, disappointed exhale. The kind of sound a person makes when they have been hoping for one answer and have received another. I sat there and I thought about that exhale for a long time. I thought about what it would have meant to tell her the real time. I thought about who, on the other end of that line, was so invested in what time it was that they would call down to a hotel front desk to ask and would be disappointed by the wrong answer. I sat there thinking, if I follow this rule, what exactly am I protecting? The next afternoon before my shift, my daughter called. Ellie was in her senior year at Geneseo. She was studying social work. She called maybe twice a week, usually on her walk back from class, just to check in. She'd gotten more attentive since her mother had died. I appreciated it more than I knew how to say. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, Ellie. You doing okay? You sound tired." "I'm fine, sweetheart. Long week at work." There was a pause. Then she said, "How's the new schedule treating you?" "What new schedule?" "The one you mentioned last week, with the second night." I sat up straighter on my couch. "I didn't mention any new schedule. You said they'd asked you to take an extra night. Wednesdays, I think you said." "Ellie, I didn't say that. I work Sunday through Thursday. I haven't taken any extra nights." She laughed, a small, uncertain laugh. "Dad, you definitely told me. Last Tuesday. We talked for like 15 minutes about whether you should ask for time and a half." I didn't say anything for a second. Then I said, "I think you might be remembering wrong, sweetheart." She was quiet on the other end of the line. Then she said, "Maybe. Sorry. It's been a long week here, too." But her voice had gone careful. We talked for a few more minutes about nothing in particular. When we hung up, I sat on my couch and I tried to remember what I'd said to her last Tuesday. I couldn't remember the conversation she was talking about. I couldn't remember not having it either. There was a hole where the memory should have been, with edges that didn't match the rest of my mind. And it occurred to me, sitting there with the phone in my hand, that if she could remember a conversation we had not had, then whatever was upstairs at the Lakeshore Inn was not staying upstairs. The leak was not contained to the building. The leak had reached me at home, through my daughter, through her memory of me. I drove to work that night with my hands tight on the steering wheel. The binder had a new rule. Rule 23. Do not discuss your shift schedule with anyone outside the hotel. I read it twice. I felt cold. Around the middle of December, on a Tuesday, the elevator started stopping on the second floor more often. 3 times in one shift. Each time, no one had called it. The third time, as the doors were closing on the empty interior, I caught a glimpse in the polished metal of the elevator's back wall. A reflection. A reflection of the lobby, distorted in the curved metal. And in the reflection, behind the front desk, was a man. He was sitting at the desk. He had his head down, like he was reading something. He was wearing the same kind of shirt I always wore to work. From the angle, with the head down, I couldn't see his face. The doors closed. The reflection was gone. I stood up and looked at the desk. The desk was empty. I was the only one in the lobby. I'd been standing in front of the elevator for 20 seconds. I sat back down. My heart was doing that thing again. The slow, sick pounding I'd come to associate with the wrong kind of attention. I did something then that I knew was a bad idea. I tried to look at my own reflection in the lobby window across the room. The lobby window was about 20 feet away. I'd been told by rule, 14, not to look at my reflection in it from more than 10 feet away. I'd never broken that rule. I broke it now. The reflection in the window was me, sitting at the desk, looking back. But I noticed, after a second of looking, that the reflection was a beat behind. Not much, maybe a third of a second. I blinked, and the reflection blinked a fraction late. I lifted my hand, and the reflection lifted its hand, but slightly slower, like a video on a delay. I held my hand still. I watched. The reflection lifted its hand again, on its own, and waved. I stood up. I want to be specific here. I stood up, and I did not remember deciding to stand up. My body had moved before my mind had given it the order. I was on my feet, and I had taken a step toward the window, and then another step, and I caught myself with my hand braced against the front desk. I did not look at the window again that night. I sat with my back to it for the remaining 4 hours of my shift. And I felt the reflection sitting in the window behind me, and I felt it watching the back of my head, and I knew, with a certainty I have never quite shaken, that the reflection had been there longer than I had. The next night, the rule list had been updated. Rule 14 now read, do not look at your reflection in the lobby window while standing more than 10 feet away from it. If you have already done so, do not look at it again. Do not look at any reflective surface for the remainder of your shift. The reflection is no longer your concern. The reflection is no longer your concern. The same phrase. The bathroom is no longer your concern. The reflection is no longer your concern. The list of things I was still responsible for was getting shorter. It was around this time that the rules began to contradict themselves. The first contradiction I noticed was small. Rule 4 had originally said, "Do not enter the pool area after 1 a.m. The door should be locked. If it is unlocked, lock it without looking inside." A new version of Rule 4 appeared in early January. Do not enter the pool area at any time. If the door is unlocked, lock it without looking inside. Do not lock it on the second attempt. If you have already locked it, do not lock it again. Read that carefully. If the door is unlocked, lock it. But also, do not lock it on the second attempt. But also, if you have already locked it, do not lock it again. What if the door was unlocked twice? What if I'd locked it before, and now it was unlocked again? Was this the second attempt? Was the first attempt my having locked it earlier in the shift? Earlier in the week? Earlier in my employment? The rule could not be both followed and not followed. The rule was a trap. I stood in front of the pool door one night with my hand hovering over the deadbolt. The door was unlocked. I had locked it earlier in the shift. I stood there for almost 3 minutes. The lobby was very quiet. I made a choice. I locked the door. The lights in the lobby flickered. Once. Twice. I stopped breathing. The lights did not flicker a third time. But here's what happened next, and I want to tell you this clearly because it changed how I understood everything. The reset came anyway. There was no third flicker. I had not, by the technical reading, broken any rule. I had locked the door, which the rule told me to do. I had not locked it twice in a row, because there had been hours between locks. I had not violated the 7-flicker rule. By every measure I could check against, I had complied. The lights came back on. It was 2:14 a.m. I sat at my desk and I looked at the painting. It was crooked. I had followed the rule exactly, and the rule had still reset me. That was the first night I understood that the rules were not protecting me. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't that. They were doing something else. They were doing something the rules themselves could not be used to predict. I started keeping a journal, not in the binder. A separate one, in a notebook I kept in my car. Every night before I left work, I'd sit in the parking lot under the orange sodium lights, and I'd write down everything that had happened. The journal grew thick. Patterns emerged. The resets always returned me to 2:14 a.m. always, regardless of when the rule had been broken, regardless of whether a rule had been broken at all. And there was a third category of resets. Resets that happened when I had not broken a rule and was not about to. Resets that happened cleanly, in the middle of an ordinary night for no reason I could identify. I started counting them. Over a 2-week period, 3 resets I could not explain. 3 nights when the lights had gone out, the lobby had gone dark, and when they'd come back on it was 2:14 a.m. and something was slightly different. A new vending machine in the corner of the lobby. A second computer at the desk, identical to the first, also logged into my account. An extra elevator at the end of the hallway that hadn't been there before. The Lakeshore Inn was getting fuller, heavier, like a recording that keeps getting copied over itself, accumulating noise. The other staff didn't seem to notice. Marisol came in every morning and didn't comment on the new vending machine, the extra elevator, the second computer. The day manager, Russ, walked through the lobby every afternoon and didn't see the new painting or the new door. Only I remembered the old version. Only I had the journal in my car. In the middle of January, on a Wednesday, the resets stopped working. I want to explain what I mean. It was 3:47 a.m. I had not broken any rule. The night had been routine. And then, with no warning, the lights went out. The reset began, but this one felt different from the start. The lights didn't just go out. They flickered, fast, much faster than 3 times, maybe 10 times, maybe 20. The 8th rule should have applied. I should have been at the door already. But I was frozen at the desk because the flickering wasn't matching the rules anymore. The flickering was faster than the rules could account for. And then the lights came back on. But the lobby was wrong. The lobby was full of people. Not many, maybe 7 or 8. They were standing in scattered positions around the lobby, the way people stand when they've all just arrived from different directions. None of them were looking at me. None of them were looking at each other. They were all standing perfectly still, and they were all in the middle of motions. One man had his hand raised, as if he'd been about to push open the front door. A woman was bent slightly forward, mid-step, her foot suspended an inch above the carpet. A child, maybe 10 years old, was looking up at the ceiling with his mouth half open. They weren't moving, they weren't breathing, they were paused. I sat at the desk and I did not move, and I did not breathe, and I watched them. They started moving very slowly, not all at once, one at a time. The man's hand reached the door. The woman's foot touched the carpet. The boy closed his mouth. They began to walk. They walked in slow motion at first, then faster, then at normal speed, and they walked through each other, through the furniture, through the walls, like ghosts being projected onto the room from somewhere else. The man walked to the front door. He pulled it open. It made no sound. He walked through. The door closed behind him, but the door hadn't moved. The actual physical door was still closed and locked. The man had walked through the image of it. The woman walked to the elevator. She pressed the button. The elevator doors opened, but the actual doors didn't move. She walked into the elevator and the doors closed, and the indicator showed her going up to the second floor, but the actual indicator was still on the lobby. The actual elevator hadn't moved. 2 timelines, 2 versions of the lobby. Mine paused around me, theirs running in fast forward through the same space. The boy was the last to leave. He walked past the front desk. He didn't look at me, but just before he went out the front door, he glanced up at the wall behind me, at the wall clock. He stopped. Just for a second, just long enough to look at the time. And then he kept walking, and he was gone, and the lobby was empty. The clock said 2:14 a.m. But the computer said 3:48 a.m., and my phone said 3:48 a.m. And outside, through the window, the parking lot lights were the parking lot lights of 3:48 a.m. The snow still falling in that specific way it falls before dawn. The sky still dark in the specific way it was dark at 3:48. The reset had happened in one place. It had not happened in others. Some part of the building had rolled back to 2:14, and another part of it hadn't, and they were sitting on top of each other like 2 photographs lined up imperfectly. I had a reset failure. I had seen it. I was the only one, and I had seen it. And the system, whatever it was, did not know I had seen it because the failure had been in the system itself. I went and got my journal from the car. I came back to the desk. I wrote it all down. Every detail. The 7 people. The boy looking at the clock. The way the door had opened twice. I wrote in shaking handwriting. The clock on the wall corrected itself a few minutes later. It jumped from 2:14 to 3:51 with a little click. The lobby felt normal again. But it didn't feel right. There was a faint smell in the air that hadn't been there before. Lavender and bergamot. I sat at that desk for the rest of the shift with my hands folded on the counter, and I did not move, and I did not look at the elevator, and I tried very hard not to think about the second floor. That morning, when I got home, I went into my bedroom closet, and I pulled down the cardboard box at the back of the top shelf, the one I hadn't opened in 2 years. I pulled out a small bottle of perfume. I opened it. I smelled it. It was the same. I put it back. I went to bed. I did not sleep. 2 days later, my daughter called again. "Hey, Dad." "Hey, Ellie. You okay? Mom said you sounded weird on the phone the other night." I did not answer for a moment. I was sitting at my kitchen table. The afternoon sun was coming through the window over the sink. I could see a small bird on the fence outside. "Ellie." "Yeah? What did you just say?" There was a pause. Then she said, "I said you sounded weird on the phone. The other night. You said Mom." "What?" "You said Mom said I sounded weird." The pause was longer this time. Then she said in a very small voice, "Dad, I didn't say that." "You did. You just said it." "Dad, I would never say that. You know I wouldn't say that." I could hear her starting to cry on the other end of the phone. I could hear her trying not to. I felt very far away from my own kitchen. "Sweetheart, I'm sorry. I think I'm just tired." "Are you sure you're okay?" "I'm sure. I love you. I love you too, Dad." I hung up. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. I told myself I'd misheard her. I told myself my mind had filled in a word that wasn't there. I told myself the things you tell yourself when you've started to suspect that the broken thing in the room might be you. But I knew I'd heard it. I'd heard her say, "Mom said." Clearly. I'd heard it. The system had reached out of the hotel. If she could say that, then whatever was upstairs was not staying upstairs anymore. The walls of the Lakeshore Inn were not the walls of the system. The system was wider than the building. The system had been wider than the building for a long time. I went to work that night. I went to the binder. I read it cover to cover, and I found Rule 36, which was new. Do not bring outside relationships into the rule system. The system does not extend beyond the building. If you believe it has, you are mistaken. The first lie I had ever caught the binder telling. I want to talk now about the second floor. I had been hearing things from the second floor for almost 2 months. The conversations, the dragging chair, the closing closet, the laugh. I had smelled my wife's perfume in the elevator. I had watched the elevator stop on the second floor, unbidden, more times than I had bothered to count. I had heard my daughter say a word that came from upstairs, and I had been resisting the second floor with everything I had. I want you to understand why. The rules around the second floor were, without exception, the most insistent ones in the binder. Rule 11 about the elevator. Rule 2 about the ice machine. The newer rule, Rule 31, that said, do not respond to sounds from the second floor. If you hear voices, do not identify them. That rule had appeared the morning after I'd heard the laugh. The second floor was, in the language of the binder, the most dangerous place in the building. It was the place the rules were trying hardest to keep me away from. Which is why, in late January, on a Tuesday around 4:30 a.m., I went up to it. I want to be clear about how I made that decision. It wasn't brave. It wasn't defiant. It was the decision of a man who had spent 4 months in compliance and who had begun to understand that compliance was itself a trap. The system was building me a smaller and smaller cage. Every "no longer your concern" was a wall going up. Pretty soon there would be nothing left in my world that I was permitted to think about, and I would be sitting at the front desk in a perfect compliance trance, and I would not even remember what compliance had cost me. I did not want to be that man. I took the master key. I walked to the elevator. I pressed the button for the second floor. The doors closed. The elevator went up. The doors opened. The hallway was dimmer than it should have been. The carpet was thicker, plusher, the way I remembered carpet from the houses I'd grown up in. The wallpaper had a pattern I didn't recognize, a faint repeating motif of small dark circles that, the longer I looked at them, started to seem less like circles and more like watching pupils. The ice machine was in its alcove halfway down the hall on the right. It was not running. It sat silent. I walked down the hall. My footsteps were quiet on the thick carpet. The door to room 207 was open about an inch. Light was coming from inside. Yellow, warm light, like a lamp. I stopped outside the door. I listened. I could hear voices. Not loud voices. Quiet ones. A conversation, intimate, 2 or 3 people talking softly. I couldn't make out the words at first, but the cadence was the cadence of people who knew each other. There was a small laugh, then more soft talking. I stood outside that door for what was probably a full minute, and during that minute the conversation drifted in and out of clarity, the way a radio drifts on a long drive. I heard a woman's voice. Think she'd like it? I heard a man's voice. The man's voice was mine. He said, I think so. I think she'd love it. We should call her tomorrow. Then the woman's voice again. And tell her about the trip. The man, my voice said, just for a little while longer. Let me have just a little while longer. I had gone very still. I want you to know that. I want you to know what it is to stand in a hallway you are not supposed to be in, and to hear your own voice on the other side of a door, having a conversation you have wanted to have for 2.5 years. The woman in that room was my wife. I could hear her now, the specific cadence of her, the way she said "and" with a slight upward lilt, the small breathy laugh she used to give when she was tired but happy. I had not heard those things in 2.5 years. Whatever I had been able to keep of her had been receding from me like a tide, and now the tide was here, on the other side of a door, and all I had to do was push it open. My hand reached for the door before I realized I was moving. I caught my hand an inch from the wood. I caught it the way you catch yourself before you step off a curb into traffic, on instinct, with the body's own memory of what is dangerous. The hand had decided to open the door without me. It had been deciding for a while. I had not been paying enough attention. I put my hand back at my side. I held it there with my other hand. I did not push the door because, in the half second when my hand had touched the wood, I had heard another sound from inside the room, the sound of a chair being pushed back, like someone standing up. And the man's voice, my voice, said something else. He said, "Did you hear that?" I took my hand off the door. I stepped back. The conversation inside had stopped. The room had gone silent. Whoever was in there was listening. They were listening for me. I walked back down the hallway as quietly as I had ever walked. I got into the elevator. I pressed the button for the lobby. The doors closed. In the polished metal of the back wall, my reflection looked at me. It was slightly delayed. It had been delayed for a long time. I rode down. I walked back to the front desk. I put the master key back on its hook. I sat down. The clock said 4:36 a.m. I'd been gone 6 minutes. For the rest of the shift, nothing happened. The audit ran normally. Marisol came in at 7. I drove home. I did not sleep. The next night, when I came in, the binder had a new rule. Rule 48. Do not return to the second floor. If you find yourself on the second floor, do not enter any room. Do not listen at any door. If you have already done so, do not return. If they have heard you, prepare for reset. I read that last line 3 times. If they have heard you, prepare for reset. I sat at the desk and I waited for the reset. It came at 1:51 a.m. The lights went out. I closed my eyes. When the lights came back on, it was 2:14 a.m. and the front desk was different. There were 2 binders. The original one, the black 3-ring, was on the shelf where I always kept it. There was a second binder on the desk in front of me. It was identical, same color, same thickness. I opened it. The first page was blank. The second page was blank. The third page had a single line typed at the top. It said, "He didn't get to finish his shift." I closed the second binder. I put it on the shelf next to the first one. I did not open it again. The system had given me a new file. The system was telling me that I now had a file. I was no longer just the night auditor. I was an entry, a name on a list. In the weeks that followed, the system began to leak. Not in big ways, in small ones. I would be sitting at the desk at 3 a.m. and I would hear, very faintly, my own voice from somewhere upstairs, saying something I could not quite make out. I would be on the phone with my daughter, and her voice would catch in the middle of a sentence, the way a recording catches when the tape is damaged, and she would say a word that was not the word she had been about to say. Once, in early February, I came home from work and found my wife's watch on the kitchen counter, ticking. I had buried it. I had buried it 3 years earlier. I held it in my hand for a long time, and I felt the small movements of its second hand against my palm, and I knew with absolute certainty that the watch was running on time that did not belong to my world. I put it in a drawer. I closed the drawer. I tried not to think about it. And the rules in the binder, started to address things outside the hotel. Rule 41. If you find an object in your home that you had previously believed lost or buried, do not return it. Do not throw it away. Place it in a closed container and forget about it. Rule 43. If a family member uses a phrase or name you do not expect, do not ask them to repeat it. Do not respond. Change the subject. Rule 45. Do not visit the grave site of a deceased relative for the duration of your employment. The grave site is no longer your concern. I read that last one and I sat at the desk for a long time. The grave site is no longer your concern. My wife was buried in Forest Lawn on the north side of Buffalo. I had visited her grave 3 times a year for 2.5 years, her birthday, our anniversary, the day she died. I had not gone in November because I'd been distracted by the binder. I had not gone in December because I'd been distracted by the resets. The system was managing my grief. The system was choosing what I was permitted to remember and what I was permitted to feel. And then, one night, I went back to the binder and I noticed that the redacted Rule 6 had thinned again. The black ink was now thin enough that I could read most of it. It said, "Do not remember your wife in the building. If you have done so, do not stop. The remembering is what holds the conversation in place." I sat with that for a long time. The redaction had not been hiding a warning. The redaction had been hiding the engine, the reason, the thing the rules were actually for. The conversation in 207 had been going on for 2.5 years. I knew that now, with the slow certainty of a man who has been pretending not to know something for a very long time. There was a version of me in that room, and there was a version of my wife in that room, and they were having a quiet evening together. And the price of that evening was that another version of me, this version, the one writing in the journal, the one talking to my daughter on the phone, was sitting at the front desk of an empty hotel, following increasingly invasive rules, watching my world get filed away into no longer your concern, until there would be nothing left of me but compliance. The system was a trade. In one room, my wife was alive. In one room, I was having the conversation I had begged the universe for every night for 2.5 years. In the other room, I was the man maintaining that conversation. I was the one keeping the lights on. I was the one following the rules, and the rules were the price. Every rule I followed was a small concession. Every no longer your concern was a piece of my world I was handing over so that the conversation in 207 could continue. Eventually, I would be small enough to fit through the gap in the door, and I would join them. And someone else, the next night auditor, would sit at the front desk and pay the price for my evening. I have been doing this job for 3 years now. That's longer than the previous record holder, whoever that was. I sometimes wonder if my number, on a list I will never see, is now the highest there has ever been. I sometimes wonder if I'm being kept on duty because I'm good at it, or because my conversation in 207 is particularly difficult to maintain, or because I am, by the standards of whatever is keeping the books, an unusually good investment. A few months ago, my daughter asked me on the phone how the job was going. She asked because she's a thoughtful girl, and she knew her mother had wanted me to take care of myself. I told her the job was fine. I told her it was quiet. I told her I'd settled into a routine. She asked if I was happy. I said, "I have what I need." It was the most honest thing I could say. I have what I need. I have her. I have the conversation in 207, even if I am not the one having it. I have a small life on the first floor, and I have a larger life on the second floor, behind a door I do not open, in a room where the woman I miss is laughing at something I have just said. And every night I sit at the front desk, and I follow the rules, and I pay the price, and the conversation continues. I am telling you this story now, and I know that telling it is a deviation. The rules have grown to include outside relationships, but they have not yet grown to include strangers. I am betting quietly that strangers do not count. I am betting that the system will let me have this one. I may be wrong about that. Let me tell you what is around me as I write this. I'm at the front desk. The clock on the wall says 3:14 a.m. The lobby is quiet. The painting above the fireplace is level. There is one pen on the desk. There is one binder on the shelf, not two. The second one disappeared a few weeks after it appeared. The ice machine on the second floor is silent. It will turn on in about 16 minutes. In a few minutes, the printer will turn on without my asking it to. A single page will come out. It will be a record of my compliance. My number will be higher than it was before. I will read it once. I will shred it. And then the phone will ring at 4:11. I will pick it up. I will tell the voice on the other end that it is 4 a.m. I will not ask whose voice it is. I have a guess. I have had a guess for a long time. I have decided not to confirm it. I am almost done telling you this story. I want to finish it. I want very much to finish it. But there is something I should mention. When I started writing this, the binder had 49 rules. I am sure of that. I had counted them earlier in the shift. 49. I just looked at the binder. It has 50. Rule 50 was not there an hour ago. It was added while I was writing this. I do not know when. I have been writing in a steady rhythm, and I have not seen any flickers in the lights, and I have not had any sense of time passing strangely. Let me read it to you. It says, "Do not finish telling the story. If you have already begun, do not name the woman in the room. If you have already named her, prepare for reset. If you remember writing this rule, the reset has already happened." I am looking at it now. I am looking at the words on the page. I am trying to remember if I named her. I do not think I did. I called her my wife. I am almost sure I did not say her name out loud in this telling, because her name is the most precious thing I still have. But the third sentence, if you remember writing this rule. I do not remember writing it. I do not believe I wrote it. I believe the system wrote it. But I am also aware, sitting here, that my certainty about anything I remember is not what it used to be. The system has been polishing my memory like a stone in a tumbler, and what is left of it is smooth, and I cannot tell anymore which of my memories are the original and which are the version that has been smoothed. So I will say this. I will say it once. If you are reading this, then I finished the story. If I finished it, then I either followed the rule or I did not. If I followed the rule, then I did not name her, and the conversation in 207 is still going, and the man and the woman in that room are still talking, and I am still at the desk, and the rules are still being followed. If I did not follow the rule, then there was a reset. And if there was a reset, then the version of me writing this is gone. The version of me you will be talking to, if you ever speak to me, is a different version. He will not remember writing this. He will not know about the second floor, or the compliance record, or his number. But he will be at the desk. He will be following the rules. And somewhere in the building, in a room at the end of a thick carpeted hallway, behind a door that is always open about an inch, a quiet conversation will be continuing. Two voices, soft, familiar. The clock on the wall says 3:14 a.m. I have been writing for a while now. I am almost done. I am going to put the journal away. I am going to put the pen down. I am going to sit at the desk and wait for the printer to turn on. And I am going to read the page once, and I am going to shred it. And then I am going to wait for the phone to ring at 4:11. And I am going to pick it up. And I am going to tell the voice on the other end of the line, the voice I have been pretending I do not recognize, that it is 4 a.m. The voice is going to thank me. The voice has been thanking me for 3 years. I am going to hang up the phone. I am going to sit at the desk. I am going to follow the rules. The time will stay correct. It always does, even when it doesn't. Someone, many years from now, will find this binder in a supply closet behind a stack of phone books, and they will read the rules, and they will hesitate, and they will think it is a prank, and they will go back to their shift, and the prank will start to turn into a job, and the job will start to turn into a life, and at some point they will sit at this desk and they will hear my voice from upstairs, faintly, through the ductwork, saying something to a woman they have never met, and they will not know that I am the one keeping their conversation going. They will not know that they have inherited me the way I inherited the man before me. They will follow the rules. The time will stay correct. I want you to know one more thing before I finish. The clock on the wall just changed. I was looking at it. It was 3:14 a.m. and now it is 2:14 a.m. and the binder on the shelf is open to a page I do not remember opening. And there is a pen on the desk that I do not remember setting down. And the painting above the fireplace is leaning 2 degrees to the right. There has been a reset. I did not feel it. The lights did not go out. The world did not skip. But there has been one. There are details around me that are slightly different from the details I had a moment ago. I am wearing a watch on my left wrist. I do not remember putting it on. It is gold. It is thin. It is hers. I have just noticed that I am holding the pen. I am writing something on the binder page in front of me, in a handwriting that is not quite mine. I am watching my hand do it. I cannot stop. The hand is writing. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. Whoever finds this, I'm sorry. The hand is finishing. The hand is setting down the pen. The phone is ringing. It is 4:11 a.m. It has always been 4:11 a.m. I am picking up the phone. I am going to say it is 4 o'clock. The voice on the other end is going to thank me. I have always loved that voice. The time will stay correct. At least, that's what the rules say.